They grow up so fast. It seems like just the other day, Jesus was a baby. And now he's 12. Sometimes I think that I don't know if you're feeling like this, but I'm feeling like this. Sometimes I think the Sunday after Christmas is kind of like, I don't know, it's that wasteland between Christmas and when things actually start up again in the new year. And you're just kind of like, it's that kind of, I think maybe the people who do the lectionary were thinking that. We'll just give them something. Because if you look at the order of things, and I know, nothing really works chronologically, but we got Christmas, he's 12, and then we got Epiphany next week, so he's back to being a kid again. Because you know that's the significance of 12, right? He's not a kid anymore. Right? It's the age of bar and bat mitzvah. Rented lips, sorry. But it's the age, he's coming of age, right? It's kind of like Luke, I think, maybe we need backstory, right? So we get the story of the birth of John, Zechariah and Elizabeth, and then the story of the birth of Jesus and everything. And then suddenly Jesus is 12, and then Shazam, the next thing that happens is that John comes out of the wilderness and says, here's Jesus, as an adult. And it's like Luke kind of went, birth story, ooh, what's the next major event? Oh, okay, 12. And then he's 30. Time for ministry. All the other stuff doesn't really matter. We don't need to have those stories. Which is too bad. I wish we had stories. I wish there were stories. Because it would be the stories of Jesus learning to be Jesus, wouldn't it? Really? Because that's what happens when you're a teenager, isn't it? I don't know. I was 30 when I was 15, so I was never really a teenager. But I understand that's what happens. But that's, do you not think it's kind of ironic that we have no stories of Jesus between 12 and 30? And when are we most likely to lose people from church? Thank you for being here. But thank you for being here. Yeah, that covers it. Okay. Don't you find that ironic? It's kind of like it's and here's my issue with this. It's that we have all these wonderful stories to tell and wonderful stories to share, and quite often we do that thing where we go, who are we in this story? Well, if you're 16, say, or 15, or 18, or 20-something, who are you in a story that's full of people that are older? You're not in the story. In fact, the stories of Jesus with young people are limited to, let the children come to me. You have to be childlike in order to enter the kingdom of heaven. Apparently, you don't have to be a teenager. You have to be childlike. It's very specific. There's no stories. It's like we just get this born, he's 12, and now he's going to do stuff. That's too bad. I wish we had stories. We could make some stories up. People do. In fact, we make all sorts of assumptions even based on just the stories we have, right? Like even this story today of Jesus being at the temple when he's 12 years old. Okay, so his parents go to the temple regularly. This is good because this establishes, of course, that Jesus is a good, well-behaved Jew who goes to temple and does all the right things, right? Plus, if 12 is indeed the age of the coming of age, right? I would try and say that word again, but I obviously muffed it the first time. Bar mitzvah. It's the coming of age. How do you get there? Well, you learn. You study. You learn how to read. You learn how to understand Scripture. You have a period of learning. And what's Jesus doing in the story? He's learning. Although, he's not learning like a normal kid, is he? He's sitting amongst a group at the synagogue of the teachers, the leaders. And they're amazed at his answers, which means he's not only answering questions, they're asking him questions, and he's answering their questions. There's back and forth. There's interaction. Why isn't he sitting at his desk in a room full of other students while someone stands at the front and talks at him and points at things on the board he's supposed to know? Come on, we don't even do that anymore, do we? Right? We've really started to make an effort to understand that people learn in different ways. So even our model of learning for Jesus, we want to say, okay, this is unique, it's different, but is it really? I mean, how often do you think those teachers in the temple there ran into somebody who was really interested and really keen? And maybe learned by discussion and talking and engagement. I'll just, not that there's anybody here from the Ministry and Personnel Committee who's listening, but I had to do an evaluation of me, of what we're doing just recently. I was late turning it in, as it happens, but nonetheless, I had to do an evaluation. One of the questions was about significant moments. And see, I think everything's a significant moment. But if you had to really pin me down, and I didn't write this down, because I was trying to be, flowery and, meaningful, instead of actually answering the question. But, which is probably what was happening in the temple in the story, by the way. But anyway, one of the things that I would say is most significant is this time, sitting here with the kids. They say stuff. They say lots of stuff. They say lots of stuff that, if you think about it, they say lots of stuff that's really important and meaningful. We often don't. In fact, one of my issues with this, and why I like to call it learning together, is that we are learning together. This is not children's time. It's learning together. Because the moment that you call it children's time and it simply becomes a question of telling the children a story or making sure they're included in the service somehow, you're looking at them like are they like entertainment or something? They're not. They're teaching you. They're certainly teaching me. Jesus is guarded by unicorns. Is one of my favorite things. Said it was Peter in Panoka. Just came out with it in the middle of it. I don't even remember what the rest of the thing was about, because that's what I learned. Jesus is guarded by unicorns. Think about it for a minute. What is a unicorn? See, now I wish Aubrey was here to tell me, because she had one. Right? They're imaginary, fantastic things that they're pure, and they're the best of everything. In fact, they're so awesome and amazing there aren't any. It makes perfect sense to me. I mean, sure, if you look in your Bible, you got your cherubim and your seraphim. And if you think a unicorn is a fantastic creature, they're just super weird. But they're actually kind of vicious, scary, mean-looking things. What's a unicorn? Is it scary, vicious, and mean-looking? No. It's beautiful and awesome. It makes you smile. Don't you think that's what ought to be guarding Jesus? We learn amazing things from those moments. Still, I have to say, I'm a little caught off guard by the fact that the Sunday between Christmas and Epiphany, we have a story of Jesus being 12 years old and being at the temple. I'm about my Father's business. Didn't you know what I'd be doing? You little... Right? I mean, in fact, I read blogs and things about, like, commentaries and stuff on this story, and one of the things that people always say is his parents would have been so upset. And what does he say in response? Well, don't you think I'd be about... It's almost like he's already being a teenager. Well, he is already being a teenager. And we've reverted to those stereotypes. Except, hang on a second, it's perfectly okay for them to be worried about him. Although you might wonder why they weren't worried about him sooner. But still, it's perfectly okay for them to be worried about him. They might even be a little ticked off and everything. But just a little bit later in the story, it says Mary kept all these things in her heart. You remember hearing that once before? Because that's what you hear at the end of the story about when the shepherds and everybody are at the manger. Mary pondered all these things in her heart. She's keeping that memory and wondering about it. It's almost like she knows something, right, is going to happen. But for now, she just wants him to be a kid. And here he is off being, not like, well, actually, I guess he is being a kid, right? Really? He's off doing his own thing. And then nothing. And then nothing. Until John appears to announce Jesus, the adult. Jesus is baptized and goes off into teaching and healing people and preaching and doing the things that we tell all those stories about. We got nothing in there. It's kind of like that time between Christmas and New Year's, right? You don't really know what to do with those few days, right? Because Christmas is on a weekday, throws your whole schedule off, right? You're not really sure what to do with those few days. It's kind of a holiday. It's not really, but it kind of is. It's that in-between time. So what are you going to do with it? Is it a time to relax? Is it a time to use that empty space to do things? What's it for? So here's Jesus telling his parents at the age of 12, telling his parents he's about his father's business. And he's in his father's house. He's learning. He's talking to the rabbis. He's learning things. He's engaging in dialogue with them. It's the beginning of his journey, right? To being the teacher and healer when he's older. And yet, we then have nothing that tells us how he got there. Was he a carpenter? His dad was a carpenter. So the odds are pretty good he would have been a carpenter. But if he was a unique and unusual teenager, maybe he wanted to join a band. Who knows? Maybe he did something different. We don't know because there's no stories. It's just kind of like we just have the teaching part. We don't know how he got there. But here he is at 12 talking to the teachers in the temple, which is kind of maybe our model for learning. That engagement as a community. But then we have nothing. Did he continue to learn like that? Did he actually follow in his father's footsteps? I mean, Joseph's footsteps, and become a carpenter? Did he do something completely different? Was he like every other teenager and sat around playing video games? I don't know, whatever. Doing that teen thing, right? Was he a rebellious teenager? Was he in fact obedient to his parents? It says he became obedient to his parents. We know that much later Jesus' view of family and community is a little bit different than it was in this moment. We also, in this story, hear him having what appears to be conversation and learning and engagement with the very people that later in life he's going to have not very nice things to say about. So his relationship with them changes too. Well, how did that happen? Did he, I don't know, continue as a 12-year-old, did he continue going to synagogue, have some experience that was negative that caused him to maybe step away, and then he came back with having different ideas? You know, like many, many teenagers do now. Maybe, in fact, what happens now is exactly what happened to Jesus. Maybe as a 12-year-old, he had some really positive, great conversations. Then maybe once he got to be 14, 15, he kind of had other things to do with his school friends and stopped going to church, synagogue. Freudian slip. And then came back. But he had different ideas now because he had some world experience. There's no stories. We don't know. But we also don't know why that happens to the church, too. We're a community of faith. We're a community of faith that sometimes has little people that then grow up and go, yeah, I've got other things to do, thanks. But then much later in life, say, they come back, maybe, because they're looking for something again. Why? Why is that? Is it because they're looking for something that they can't find here? Is it because we don't listen anymore? Once they get to be teenagers, they're just so, no offense, they just get to be so much trouble. They just get to be so much trouble, it's not worth the trouble. Because, when they're adults and they've grown up, they'll be back and we can engage them again. That's a tough question, I think, because it's on us as a community to find out. Maybe it's simply a question of what they need at that point in their life is found somewhere else. Maybe it's a question we don't listen to them to find out what they might need here. Maybe it's a question of just not listening. And that's what I find so interesting about this little engagement Jesus has with teachers in the synagogue, in the temple. Is that there was back and forth. Clearly, there was back and forth. There isn't always quite so much back and forth later. Is there? I mean, there is, but it's all about testing each side. It's, that saying about how we don't listen to know, we listen to respond. And here's a moment of, with all due respect, here's a moment where Jesus is clearly, and the teachers are clearly listening to know. But we have so many stories later on where, no, we're not listening to know anymore. We're listening to answer. So what happened in between? I think as a community of faith, as a church, this is where we're at. And not just because it's between Christmas and Epiphany, but this is where we're constantly at. We have children that we try and teach things to, and sometimes we listen and we learn from them. They get to be a little bit older and off they go, and we're, oh well, they'll be back. We need to maybe have more conversation, engage them more, and find out. And when they're older, we have these stories. The stories of the very adult Jesus that we're somehow expecting everyone can possibly relate to. Maybe we need to have a few thoughts about that. Maybe we need to ponder that in our heart, as it were. Because maybe that's what's going on with Mary. Maybe it's not just a question of she's remembering these things and she's carrying them forward. Maybe she's learning from these things. Maybe that period of Jesus' life became one in which he had amazing experiences, incredible experiences and adventures, and did really interesting things because Mary and Joseph knew he needed that. Maybe they didn't just slot him into his place in society like you would have in the first century. So maybe he didn't become a carpenter. Maybe he did. We don't know. What we do know is that when we share with each other stories from our own life and relate our own experiences, and we listen, we learn. That's what we do with the stories of Jesus later in life, isn't it? We share the stories and we hope to learn from those stories. Let's listen to each other too. Not so I can tell you a story that's better than your story, but so that I know your story. Not so that I can tell you what you should have done in your story, or how, oh, that must have been embarrassing for you, but so I can learn about you. Maybe this moment, maybe we don't need all those moments between this one and Jesus being announced by John, because this story tells us what happened. Jesus engaged people and listened and learned and lived in a way that brought him to what he needed to do. That's how he filled the in-between time. How do you fill yours?